Hey, what's up? Welcome to Fathering Our Future. I'm Anthony Vandegrift, and I'm not the perfect dad, but every day, just like you, I am trying to be better. It's crazy to think, but we are quickly approaching 4 years of this podcast. And I can honestly say, as I think back on everything, that I could have done a better job on some episodes. Some interviews that I published probably weren't so hot, but there were some good things sprinkled throughout. One of those was the interview that I did with Joe Walker, and I believe I titled it The Story Behind the Cake. If you want to know what it's all about, go back and listen to it. Joe's got a wonderful story. He joins me again today, though, to talk about our children and their mental health. This is what he focuses on right now in his life with his practice in North Carolina. He's going to give us some practices that we can implement in our home, strategies. He's going to talk about some of the things that really impact our kids in a negative way when it comes to the mental health. He's going to help us know what we can do as fathers to raise mentally and emotionally healthy children. I want to break in real quick and let you know how much I appreciate you listening to the podcast. My prayer is that I can be a help and a blessing to you on your fatherhood journey. So if you're not already subscribed to the podcast, go ahead and subscribe. And if at any point you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me via email at fatheringourfuture@gmail.com. And if you want other good content, you can go to the website, check out the blog, and other free resources. Thank you again for listening. Be blessed. Do you remember when you became a dad and all of a sudden those New Balances just hit differently? There's something about fatherhood that impacts your wardrobe, and I'm happy to share that I can help you with that now. Fathering Our Future now has merch. We have sweatshirts and hats and other pieces of clothing that you will enjoy sporting as a father. Just go to fatheringourfuture.com, select merch, or click the link in the description of this episode and get you something that you will enjoy and be proud to wear as a dad. Dad, I want you to know I care about you and I am on your side. So I have a free gift for you. I've put together a 7-day devotional, extracted from my devotional, Following Our Father, to help you realign your identity as a dad to be the dad that God has called you to be and that your children need you to be. Simply click the link in the description below and get your free 7-day devotional. Well, Joe, it's so good to have you back on the podcast. How have you been doing, friend?
I've been doing really well, and you've been doing well. I've been tracking, so yeah, excited to see all the things you got going on.
Yeah, it's been pretty neat. Getting some good guests along the way, but I will make mention of this. Over the almost 4 years that I have been doing this, there have been a handful of guests that I've interacted with that I thought, you know what, I'd like to keep in touch with them, and you are on that list for me. I have a reminder on my phone that goes off once a quarter to text particular men and fathers that I've connected with, and you're one that I do my best to keep in contact with, just because you've modeled some really cool things in your life, and you're doing cool things, and you definitely have a servant's heart. You love to help people. And the last time you were on, we talked about your incredible story of visiting Sierra Leone and going through the joy and the challenges of adopting Abraham and James. Before we get into our conversation for today, how about we do this? How about you give us a little bit of a life update on how Joe's been doing from then up until now?
Yeah. First off, I appreciate all the kind words and really enjoyed the last time I was on. And so happy to be one of those guests who can return. Life here is busy with 6 kids, but fantastic. Since the last time you and I talked, I have opened a mental health clinic. And I know it's part of what we're going to talk about today. It's called The Loft. It's based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I have myself in the office, and then there are 3 other practitioners who are also in the office. And we all predominantly treat young people, so kids, teens, young adults. So that's a big change since I saw you last. In terms of James and Abraham, they are thriving. So James now is a graduating senior in high school.
Nice.
So he's making his college decisions, which is him and then my oldest biological son, Joe, are both in that same boat. James has recently been offered the opportunity to play soccer for Lee's McRae, which is a Division II school, only about 3 hours from here. So that's really fantastic. And Abraham is finishing up his freshman year of high school, and still running track and thriving in the hurdles. He's actually injured right now. He's recovering from a break in his ankle, and so I know he's itching to get back out and compete. And then my 4 bio kids are doing fantastic as well. So as a family, things are really good.
Good, good. That's awesome. I would welcome and highly encourage anyone who's maybe new to the podcast who didn't get to hear our first conversation to go back and check that out, because it's a remarkable story. It's super cool. It's a modern day depiction of what I think love is supposed to look like, and I'm glad everything's going so well. But like you mentioned, you have a new practice called The Loft, and you deal with young people, like you said, kids, youth, young adults, and you help them with mental health issues. You're there to counsel. You're there to just help them through everything that they're going through. And I think in the world we live today, that's a lot. And so I wanted to have you on to focus on this. The numbers may have changed since I looked at this, but the last time I checked, the CDC reported that it's 1 in 5 youth, so this ranges ages 13 to 18, they are either currently or they eventually at some point in their life will experience a serious mental illness. Now, for the commoner like me, I'm not even sure what that means. So maybe help us out first on what are some of these serious mental illnesses that the CDC could be referencing here?
Yeah, really good question. I'm actually surprised that the number is that low. I have not looked at it in probably the last year either. My guess is it's growing higher. When we talk about serious mental health disorders, the first place that my mind goes to, especially with young people, is major depression. So the diagnosable term is major depressive disorder. And just to give you some context, so right now in my clinic, I have, let's call it 100 active clients, plus or minus probably 5 or 10. Of the 100 that I have, I would say 90 of them are between, fourth grade and somewhere in their college journey. And 22 of those, Anthony, have had either recently or it's because their parents reached out to me, have had suicidal ideations.
Wow.
So we're talking about major depressive disorder is the diagnosis, leading to things like self-harm, suicidal ideations, dangerous coping mechanisms, which, obviously talking about, drug, alcohol use, things like that. So that's the first place that my mind goes to. There are obviously schizophrenia, bipolar, like these are very serious mental health disorders too. But I think what people lose sight of is that we are all susceptible to a very serious form of depression. And I know we're going to talk later on about what some of the potential causations could be. I put that in the category of serious, and that doesn't even include then high levels of anxiety or struggling with maybe self-esteem or identity issues due to maybe an ADHD diagnosis or something like that. So at the Loft, we see the whole spectrum from some generalized anxiety because we're going through a very difficult adolescent phase, which is very typical, up to the most serious and the most critical, which is young people who are questioning whether or not they want to continue to live.
Yeah. Yeah. That breaks my heart that people get to that point, and you bringing up depression and then talking about it in that context, I think makes it a little more real and tangible that it's one of those things growing up that was always kind of dismissed. The mental health thing, I think, really took off and blossomed, I would say, within the last decade. But when I was younger, like this wasn't anything. And if you had depression, it was, well, you're just maybe you're not close enough to God, or maybe you're not reading your Bible enough. That was kind of what was pitched back then.
Right.
Fortunately for me, if I had my moments, and I likely did, I never had anything super tragic. But the fact that one thing can lead to another, it seems relatively quickly if depression goes untreated. So
Yeah.
I I'll say it one more time, but I appreciate the work that you're doing because I think it's super important. Um, let's go ahead and jump to the factors. What are some of the major factors that are resulting in these mental health issues for youth?
Yeah. So let me start with probably the scariest thing. When we look at something like major depression, there actually isn't a trigger, which makes it really difficult to treat, very frustrating for the person who is suffering from major depression, and of course the families, because there's a real sense that they don't control how it is they're feeling. There are some things that we can do, and I'll talk about that. But so some of these mental health disorders, which attack us, don't have necessarily an identifiable causation. It's not because something has happened. There's not necessarily a traumatic event. They just come about. You can feel really good over a long period of your life, and then all of a sudden you don't feel so good, and you're not exactly sure why. I have had since I was 15 years old. I've had something called panic disorder. Panic disorder means that I am susceptible to a panic attack without any causation. So it makes it a little different than an anxiety attack. Anxiety attack is induced by a high level of stress because of something that's happening in your environment. Panic disorder means I can feel great and then immediately go into that fight, flight, freeze stage. But up until the age of 15, I never had a panic attack. I felt really great. Um, so that's just a personal example of how fast these things can come on. However, there are some other things that I think are leading to the increase in anxiety, the increase in depression, suicidality, self harm in young people, and I think parents need to be very aware. There's a great book that I think should be required reading for all parents. It came out about a year ago called The Anxious Generation. The Anxious Generation started with a hypothesis that our recreational screen time, the amount of time that we spend on digital, so that would be a combination of our phones, television, our computers, our iPads. Um, the hypothesis was as we increase our recreational, so outside of work and school, digital footprint, there's a correlated rise in anxiety and depression, especially amongst young people. And that hypothesis proved to be correct. In fact, it's a pretty dramatic rise. So a lot of the research talks about, sort of mainstream internet in 2000 and then the app store around 2010. And it kind of shows this hockey stick increase and specifically what's happening to adolescents. So the very first thing that I would say is, if you're a parent and you're struggling with, should I or shouldn't I get my young person a phone? How much freedom should I give them when we're talking about different applications and things? Become as informed as you can because the research is there.
Yeah.
You just got to go read it. But I think there's something else that's happening too. So, not necessarily talked about in the book, maybe alluded to, is it's not just the screen time itself, but it's the exchange that we make, right? So if I'm spending a lot of time on my screen, then I'm not doing the things that we've been doing for thousands of years that genetically our brains are programmed to like. I'm not getting outside. I'm not moving my body. I'm not having, real deep human connection. I'm not putting good things in my body. So my nutrition is probably off kilter. I'm eating a lot of ultra processed foods. I'm not getting quality sleep. So a lot of what I see in the office when, and it's not just young people because I work with dads too. It's not a big part of my practice, but I do work with some dads who are struggling. So this applies to young people and adults alike. There are some controllables. We have to be aware that our brains are genetically predisposed to like certain things, and when we get away from those things and exchange, these sort of organic, God-given antidepressants, if you will, and we start climbing into digital and having less depth in our relationships, and we're not getting deep, meaningful, purposeful conversations or trains of thought, we're opening ourselves up to higher levels of anxiety, depression, so on and so forth.
Wow. So I feel like this varies from person to person, but I'll ask you, what is your recommended amount of screen time per day? I don't know if it changes for adult or child, but what is that for you?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And I think I think this is an everybody issue. I think the reason we talk so much about young people is because like right now, my 6 kids, having twin girls in there, and then my 2 adopted sons, they range in age from 14 to 18. So, six teenagers. This is really the first generation where during brain growth, not just development, but our brain continues to grow until we're about 28 years old. And so as it continues to grow, obviously it continues to develop too. So during this brain growth period of time, we are watching young people spend countless hours digesting nothingness. And so I think they're almost like guinea pigs. And we don't know how is this going to impact them cognitively when they're 30.
Yeah.
Is it going to result in less ability to process complex problems? Is it going to result in brain fog? Is it going to result in lower attention spans? Because this is the type of stuff that we see now. So will that persist? And then, of course, with that, will we see a continued uptick in anxiety, depression, so on and so forth. But what I'm about to tell you, I think applies to all of us, because when I meet with adults, and even when I do an assessment on my own family, I would say that we probably are all too dependent on technology at this point.
Sure.
So the way that it's kind of classified in the anxious generation, which I've adopted and really like, is there is screen time that we use for school or work. And then there's the recreational screen time. So kind of, the stuff that we're doing outside of the necessary. I really like the 2 hour a day cap. We're still waiting on some very specific guidelines from the American Psychology Association, the American Pediatric Association. Like the research continues. And so there's not a tried and true. Although if you dig deeper into some of the clinical studies, some of the research that's going on, I feel like this 2 hour marker, and that would include scrolling on your phone, gaming on a device, watching television, right? I think the 2 hours a day is a pretty good place to be. In my household, again, 14 to 18-year-olds, I think my young clients are surprised when they hear that my kids are not allowed to game at all during the week. So, Monday through, Thursday after school, there's no computer games. There's no gaming. There's no just casually watching television. I know that they do utilize their phones to collaborate on homework and do other things. And so, but we also set pretty strict time limits on their apps. So we will leave communication apps open so that they can have, meaningful interactions with their friends and classmates. But we shut everything else down at a fairly early time in the evening. We do open it up a bit more on the weekends, but I think every family needs to start with, where are we at now, right? I had a young man in the office, my final client last evening is a freshman in high school, and we were talking about brain health, and we were talking about his phone usage, and he said, I think I only use it 3 hours a day. And then like he went in, he checked, he's like, ooh, it's actually considerably more than that. And so we were talking, and here's the thing, like every young person that comes into my office will acknowledge that, higher levels of phone use is not healthy for them. Like I've never had one like push back on the concept that it's somehow good for them or that it's not detrimental. So they're all aware,
Yeah.
which kind of leads to the question, so why do we do it if we know it's bad for us? I think the answer is they don't fully appreciate how bad it is for them, and there is a fear of missing out on some things. But with this young man, I said, "Why? What if we took that 3 hour marker that you talked about? We just start there, since you were higher than that. What if we just for 1 week? Because I'm going to see him again next week. What if we just try to get down to that and no more than that every day?" And so, is that a perfect solution? No, but that felt manageable to
Yeah.
him. And so if we can reduce, and then, if he's going to cheat on a particular day, what were you feeling? What did you feel like you needed your screen for? Did you get what you were looking for? So on and so forth. So, look, man, I think the short answer, Anthony, is we need to appreciate what it's doing to us, and just like drinking alcohol, taking drugs, having addictions to, or dependencies on pornography or things like that. Like these things, we fundamentally know are bad for us. Maybe we're willfully ignorant about recreational screen time, and so let's get over that. Like let's educate ourselves and then make some decisions, informed decisions based upon what we see.
Yeah. Now, you might be able to speak to this better than I can articulate it, but when you talk about knowing that something is bad for you, but being unable to stop, my mind goes to addiction. And maybe addiction is categorized and talked about differently in your circles. But am I off base in thinking that it's addiction? How should we think of addiction? And then is the way that we then treat addiction um, incremental, like you just talked about with your most recent client, just saying we're not going to get to the perfect mark where we want to get, but let's dial it back to where you thought you were.
Yeah, really great question. So actually, we have in the U.S. we have what's called the DSM. It's our diagnostic manual. It's where all of the recognized mental health disorders within the United States are located, and we have almost using well, it really is. It's based upon a traditional medical model where a client has to meet certain criteria to be diagnosed with something, right? So that's the manual that we use for diagnostic purposes. They have a similar type manual in the UK, and already in the UK they have like gaming addiction, for example. So that is an actual diagnosable mental health disorder that we can recognize and treat. We don't have that yet in the US, but I am very confident that we will in the next version of the DSM, whenever that comes out. So right now, when I'm talking to clients and, of course, their parents in the office, I'm using the word dependency a lot lately.
Okay.
I do think I have a couple clients, and I think they would be the first ones to tell you this, where their usage probably does rise to the level of addiction. And when I think about addiction, what I'm thinking about is I'm using something, I'm compelled to use something to feel contentment, fulfillment, some level of happiness to the exclusion of other things. So it gets in the way of me being able to live a normal life, whether it's going to school, going to work, having social interactions, right, outside of the thing that it is that I feel compelled to use. I do have a couple clients who I think have gaming addictions, but I think most of the young people that I'm seeing right now, and their parents too, it's more of a dependency. It's a learned behavior. I use this thing because it's available to me. It's really easy to pick up. We have them, sitting next to us all the time. I get bored. I don't know what to do. I can grab a quick dopamine hit from picking up my phone. The problem with that, Anthony, is that there's no residual effect. So, like, if I'm watching I don't know. Like I'm a big fan of SNL, but I cannot stay awake long enough on Saturdays to watch SNL live. I can't watch it live. I'm too tired.
You're a
Um,
dad of six. It makes
I'm a
sense.
dad at 6. Like that's a solid hour and a half past my bedtime.
Right.
So I will like I'll get on YouTube on Sundays and I'll watch a lot of the SNL clips. And of course, while I'm doing that, I'm laughing. The neurotransmitters that make my brain feel good, those are firing, and I'll scroll through them pretty quick. The problem with that digital type of content, and because it is so quick, as soon as I put my phone down, like I kind of like baseline to not feeling anything. Whereas if you go take a walk, or you go for a bike ride, or you have a really good cup of coffee with a friend, not only do you feel good during that period of time, but the residual effect is real. The neurotransmitters that are telling your brain, "Hey, like we feel really good right now," they are firing during the event and they are firing after the event. So we can actually build some momentum and feel good longer than the conclusion of whatever the event is, and that's what we're not getting through digital.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great explanation of that. Just because, in a sense, it's almost as if if we're allowing our kids to have phones and we're allowing them to, you know, utilize it however they choose, we're almost guilty, I would think, of creating that dependency and giving them the opportunity to learn that behavior. Hey, if you're a new dad or choosing to embark on a fresh start as a father, I have a gift for you. I wrote a book a while back called Cut the Crap: Direct Tips for Becoming a Dad. I don't teach you how to change a diaper. That one's totally on you. But I do talk about 5 elements that you need to focus on as a dad if you want to be the dad your children need you to be. Now, this is completely free. It is yours. There's no strings attached. The only thing that I'd like you to consider is if the book brings value to you as a father, make a contribution by going to fatheringourfuture.com/support. But you don't have to. Again, it is a free gift from me to you. The link is in the description after the end of the episode. Click it, get your copy, and I pray that it helps you. Everyone has an opinion on fatherhood, but there's only one place that we should actually look, and that's to God, our Father. That's why I wrote Following Our Father, a devotional for dads. In this, I cover 30 qualities and attributes of our Father in heaven that help us better understand our identity as dads. Each devotional is followed up with a daily step so that we can take the principles of our Father and immediately apply them to our own lives. This is a tool and a resource in your hands that will bless you. Click the link in the description and get yourself a copy of Following Our Father today. Let me ask you this because you brought it up. And if I understand correctly, all 6 of your kids have phones?
They do, yeah.
Okay. And you talked about having, strict screen time limits on particular things and allowing certain apps to go. You brought up pornography, and this was not on my notes, but I do want to ask because I feel like it's getting talked about a whole lot more as of recent. And I think it clearly has a negative impact. So my question is, how strict should parents who give their kids phones, how strict should they be on locking their phone down to where they're unable to access pornographic content?
Yeah, if a parent figures out how to do that, let me know. The reality is, our young people are so brilliant that they can learn workarounds pretty much through everything. And so I think,
Okay.
so what do we do instead, right? There's a couple of things that we can do. One, this is a like like most things, I've been fortunate enough to have the birds and the bees conversation with 6 different children, including my twin daughters, at all various stages of their life, right? And doing that early on, before it becomes awkward and uncomfortable for them, and not making it awkward and uncomfortable, talking about, this is biology. This is how we've been created. This is how the world works. That has proved like a really successful technique. I would take the same approach to talking about pornography, talking about hard things, drugs, alcohol, all of it. Anything that concerns us as parents, we should invite open dialogue
Yeah.
with our young people. So that that's the first thing. Like let's not make them feel shamed or guilty over what are very natural instincts and impulses because of the behavioral toll gates that they're, the psychosocial behavioral toll gates that they're going through. Of course, they're going to be curious about the opposite sex. Of course, they're going to be exposed to certain things, and there are rabbit holes they can go down. So let's talk about why it is that we want them to avoid it. My wife and I also we spot audit phones. So our kids recognize in our house like everything is ours, and we allow them to use it. So we never have the debate over this is mine. Well, no, not really, not
Right.
here. I try to give my kids as much autonomy as I can. Like this is something that I'm also growing more and more passionate about. So I want them to be autonomous. But there are certain things that, again, because of where they're at in their brain growth, and because of how much stuff is out there, that I feel compelled to protect against. So I'm not that interested in reading text messages between my kids and their friends. Like, I'm not that interested in, I don't know, a lot of what I don't necessarily comprehend about certain shows that they may like or games that they play. But they do know that at any point in time, they're susceptible to us just kind of picking up their device and going through it. We do limit some applications. We just don't let them have because we feel like it's just easier to access things there where it's
Sure.
harder other places. So if they're going to do something like access pornography, I want them to have to think about it as much as possible or work towards it, because each step they take gives them an opportunity to self-correct,
Mm.
right? Um, and then I think maybe a really important thing for parents to remember is that, whether it's pornography or trying alcohol or whatever it is that parents are fearful of, like there's a really good chance that they're going to go through these things anyway, especially in the teenage years where they're experimenting as a part of discovering who you are and creating an identity. Punishment, consequences, sure, but maybe we start with just conversation. What is it that you're looking for? What is it that you feel like you're getting from this? Where else can maybe we find that? Instead of just knee jerk reacting to what's easy, I'm going to punish you because you did this. Let's first appreciate that what they're looking for and what they're engaging in is a natural part of their development. But we want to kind of reroute the way that they're doing it. I hope
Yeah.
that makes sense.
No, I think that's great advice because okay, so from a biblical perspective, Paul talks about in the book of Romans that Christ did not even come to condemn us. So if the one who has the full right to condemn chooses not to and takes a different approach, we as parents should probably do the same. I don't know that really gets us anywhere, but oftentimes I think when we do have that immediate punishment, consequence, condemnation approach as parents, um, I think we're serving self more than serving the child. And this is more about like no kid of mine is going to be involved in this or doing that because we think it's going to reflect back on us and our
Mm.
reputation. And so we're looking out for number one, and we're not actually looking out for the kid. So no, I think that's great advice. And then just having that open door for communication. That's one thing I've focused on a lot recently with sex, sexuality, having, conversations about it all with your kids. I've done a little mini series on that up to this point to try to learn what I can learn so that I can better engage in those conversations with my kids. But having that open door of you're going to mess up, I messed up, I still mess up. Let's talk about it. Let me help you. I think as long as our perspective is never to harm and always to help, I think that's the right mentality for us to have. So, no, I think what you said is great explanation and great
But
advice.
I think you bring up a good point too about parenting from a place of self-interest. I see this quite a bit, and you know, I really try hard not to pass judgment on any parent because I strongly believe that the vast majority of us are doing the very best we can with what we have in the moment, right? And so we
Sure.
don't always fully appreciate how the brain develops. We don't always fully appreciate sort of some of the natural toll gates that young people have to pass through. Um, Here's a piece of advice that I hand out freely in the clinic. Once our young people hit that period of adolescence, so once they get to 12, 13 years old, some it's even a little bit earlier, especially in modern times, it could be as early as 11. Once they hit that adolescence phase, they are going to be their brain, because it's going through the identity formation of life, it's going to be positioned to resist any type of teaching or advice that's coming from a place of authority, right? Well, okay, so then like, what do we do? Do we just not give our kids any advice anymore? Um, I, I'm like encouraging parents to coach, ask questions as much as you can. So if you take more of a coaching philosophy as opposed to an advisor philosophy, your kids are going to be way more willing to engage you because now you're being curious. The knee jerk reaction for a young person is you don't understand, right? Like you don't understand, like you don't get what it is. And I think probably more than ever, that's true. I didn't grow up with access to the World Wide Web. I certainly didn't. I mean, I didn't get my first cell phone until I was a senior in college, and it was the most basic safety phone, right, ever. And
Right.
so, in some respects, when they say like you don't understand, I think they're right. Like it's
Sure.
very difficult for us as parents to model what our parents did because technology has just it's passed up our ability to do that. So instead, using a really inquisitive, curious approach, teach me about what you're doing. Why do you use Snap to communicate instead of text messaging? Like that's a question I get all the time. Like parents are like, well, like why do they need Snap? Like we just text message. No, you just text message. Young people don't text message, and if you ask them why, there's actually a really good reason. And so I'm not going to give it away. If you're listening and you have a teen and you're wondering why they use something like Snap over text messaging, go ask them.
Yeah.
Be curious, ask a lot of questions, coach. And then when something really big is happening, something serious is coming up in their life, they will be more willing to come and engage you because they're not going to come from a position of I'm going to be judged, I'm going to be ridiculed, I'm going to be punished. They're going to start from a position of my parents are going to be curious, and they're going to help me navigate through this, which is really what we want in our young people anyway. We want them to build the ability to resolve complex issues on their own. We want them to have resilience. So coaching over teaching is what we use in the house now. It's not always perfect. It's simple advice. It's not easy, Anthony. I'm a former lawyer, as you know, and so I always want to get advice. So I have to fight that instinct and that urge.
Sure.
But since we started doing this, I don't know, maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, I feel like the communication, the conversations that I've had with my, before they were teens, but when they were kids and now as teens, we talk about things that I don't think we would have talked about before if I would have followed the old, more traditional approach.
Yeah. No, and I think I think there's wisdom to that for sure. That reminds me of something that happened yesterday at school pickup. So I pick up my two oldest kids, ages 8 and 6, and we have a dance class for my third JoJo on Tuesday nights. So she had fallen asleep in the car. I also have the baby with me, and she's asleep. So this older woman who I've not seen there before is walking the two kids to the car in the carpool line, She opens the door and very loudly she says, "Oh, you've got two asleep." And immediately the baby's like wide eyed. I was like, "You've got to be kidding me." And in that moment, I kind of chuckled because I think she had good intentions. She was just a sweet old lady. She sees two little girls asleep. She means well.
Right.
But her intentions didn't really help the baby and they didn't really help me out. And so I think sometimes as parents, we kind of fall guilty of this, of we have good intentions in trying to teach our kids and trying to help them and trying to protect them and trying to just confine them to the path that we think is right for them. Um, but good intentions, I don't think are always good enough. And I think sometimes what you said, we have to ask those questions. We have to be attuned to where our kid is at, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing. And then we have to speak to that.
Mhm.
Because otherwise we're just going to pass out, the top 10 things that we've heard dads should say to their kids, but completely out of the right context. So no, I think that's great wisdom. Just being willing to ask the questions and not assume that you know it all, and just try to do what you think is best without any information. Um, Let me ask you about social media. So your kids have phones. I, I saw a clip. I had him on the podcast this past week at the time we're recording this, John Deloney, but I saw a clip of him where he talked about his kids don't have social media and they won't have access to it while they're in his house. I'm curious your take on that, and how you feel that's impacting mental health illness with young people.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the big topics in the anxious generation.
Okay.
A big premise in the book is specific to social media, and then it kind of expands out to the recreational screen time that we're talking about. So, look, social media, unfortunately, could be an amazing tool, and when
Yeah.
used in certain ways, it is an amazing tool. Unfortunately, that's probably not the corporate intent of the companies who are running social media, and so making it sticky, keeping people on there, keeping them away from all the other things that we talked about is where the real danger comes in. And then, of course, as we were talking about, modeling certain things as parents to our kids, understanding that when they do access social media, it's opening them up to a whole bunch of other people who are also then modeling things, modeling behaviors, modeling ideologies and values and beliefs. And so, we do allow our kids to have social media. There are some that they can't. TikTok is a no-no in our house. I don't see anything other than there's just no real benefit to it. It's
Sure.
just disruptive. Um, I really like Twitter in terms of social media platforms as a parent. I like Twitter for a couple different reasons. My kids are athletes, and so a big way that they get their news is through social media. I'm old, so I read Apple News, but my kids get it through social. Well, on Twitter, because everything that they get fed and they like is sports content. Like that's the only content that gets pushed to them. In addition to that, we can have so like where my kids can have an account. I also have their accounts open on my device all the time. So it's not like they have to log out and I have to log in, and there's not that extra step to
Yeah.
check. While they're active on Twitter, I can also be mirroring them, which is just a sort of a built-in accountability thing, right? So
Sure.
it's not that I always want to be doing that. I don't have the time or the energy, but they recognize that I can. And so, in terms of what they're going to do with their accounts, Instagram, all my kids have, but very few of them post. One of the, another benefit, my oldest biological son, Joe, about, I don't know, I guess it was over the summer, started a digital photography and digital video business. He's going to go study photojournalism at Ohio University, my alma mater up in Athens, Ohio. And he utilizes Instagram to share his, sports photos. He shoots mostly the local athletes in the community and his digital content. What's interesting about that is I have a senior football player from the area here that goes to a neighboring high school. I have him in the room as a client. And he's really impressed with Joe's work. And so he came in a couple of weeks ago and he said, some of my teammates and I were going through Joe's Instagram account. And we love his videos and his pictures, but we can't find a picture of him. What does he look like? And I thought, that's great. Like my kid's using the tool in a really smart way, right? But the fact that it's not that I don't ever want him posting a picture of himself. This wasn't something that was even taught to him. It's just he utilizes it for a particular reason, right? Yeah. So like anything else, Anthony, is any of it inherently bad? Is an Xbox or a PlayStation inherently bad? No. Great form of escape for young people. Triggers a lot of creative, complex, thinking with the brain. But if we're on a gaming device for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours straight, and we're using it instead of going outside and then it becomes a problem. And I think when we're talking about applications, social media, it's about having the same conversations with your kids. I really want this. Why? Why do you want it? What is it that you think you're going to get that you can't already get through the other tools that you have access to? And I really do ask that question from a place of curiosity. I'm not if they can answer me and give me a reason that I think is valid, I'll meet them there.
Sure.
We with Joe, our oldest, he Snap was kind of coming into being a big thing in between his 8th and 9th grade year. And so he asked for Snapchat. We said yes, couldn't really think of any reason not to give it to him. And then a piece of research came out that suggested that Snap and TikTok were the two social media apps that were were most detrimental for your mental health. And I thought, oh gosh, I just handed the keys to Snap over to my kid. Yeah. So, however, Joe hadn't misused the app yet. So I was trying to think of a way that I could, get Snap off of his phone, but not disrupt our relationship. So I actually bought it off of him. I made a deal with him. I said, look, I don't think Snap's good for you. And he said, yeah, but I'm not misusing it in the ways you talk. I said, yeah, that's fair. So I'll tell you what, I'll write you a check for X number of dollars. I'll buy Snap off of you with the understanding that if you use it, you put it back on your phone and I find out, you owe me double that money back. Understanding that it was a significant amount of money. So one, if he denied it, it was an indicator that maybe he had a problem. Sure. And two, I knew that once he took the money, there was no way he was going to be able to earn enough to pay me back, at least not at that point in his life. So that's how we handled Snap with him. Now, fast forward to his 17th birthday. He's not using Snap. This is the deal we have. We signed a contract with him. It was supposed to go until he's 18. Joe has made a lot of deposits, which means he's earned a lot. He's built up a lot of equity with us. We trust him. He comes to us at 17. He says, hey guys, I understand why we made the deal that we did. And I fully appreciate the terms. The problem is this is the modern day form of communication. I can't get my high school baseball uniform combinations because they come over Snap, not over text message. So somebody has to take an extra step to send me what I should be getting anyway. It is difficult for me to collaborate with some of my peers at school because they will not text, they won't check text messaging except every 2 or 3 days. Snap is their form of text messaging. That's a very good, valid point. And so Joe, having made a lot of deposits, building up a lot of equity, us trusting in him, we tore up the contract. We actually took the restrictions off all of his social media, or I should say applications because it's beyond social media, but said to him, in exchange, what we would like for you to do is be introspective about your own use. And we can help you. We're going to remove the restrictions, but we can help you be accountable. So why don't you come back to us with a plan on what that looks like? How much time do you really need on various apps? And just be truthful with yourself. And he came back with a plan that I think was far more stringent than what my wife and I probably would have put on him.
Well,
And so that type of collaboration, as teenagers get older, that's not going to be an effective technique necessarily with a 12 or 13-year-old. But as they get older and they've made those deposits, and their brain has grown and developed a little bit more, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, I love collaborative solutions with our teens,
yeah,
because they do know.
right. Well, they're getting ready to have to know too. I mean, he's getting ready to go off to college.
That's
He's
right.
not going to be in your home. In your home, he's not going to have you right there at the drop of a hat to be able to do something for him. Um, it's like you said, like we want to raise our kids to be independent and to be autonomous. And if we constantly try to control everything or baby them all the way through the process, they're going to have this dependency on us, and that's going to prevent them from being able to blossom and live the life that they're created to live. I love that explanation of having that collaborative framework in the house. I think that is genius. It's really cool how that's worked out. Kudos to you, um, for doing that. Um, Let me ask you this. This was one of the things way back when we talked about having this conversation, and you had just opened up your practice. One of the things that came up was the issue of parents. So uh, you have uh, you have patients struggling with their mental health, and one of the observations was a lot of this is due to the parents. Now, is this due to what the parents are doing? Is this due to parents having their own mental struggles that they're just not addressing? Uh, how much or how often do parents have a negative impact on their children's mental health, and what are some of the reasons for that?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, I always, when I take a new young person into the loft, I always make the assumption that I'm working with the young person and the parents.
Okay.
So I'm going to do a lot of parent coaching, even though it's the the teen or the child that I'm working with in the room. There's probably something that I can help the parents learn, and like we said before. I mean, I think most of us are doing the best we can with what we have. But there's just some gaps in our knowledge, or we feel a certain pressure to conform to what other people are doing. And so, um, I'll say this, like, I mentioned earlier, if you take I mentioned like 100 clients and 22 of them having suicidal ideations. Um, if you took those 100 and you took all 100 and you lined them up and you said, okay, Anthony, pick out the ones that are really striking. I mean, here's their family profile. Here's their socioeconomic profile. Here's how they do in school. Like, here's their grades, right? Now tell me, here's what they look like. Pick out the 22 that are really struggling. You wouldn't be able to do it. So some of it is for reasons that we don't fully understand yet. I like to think about the brain like space. There's pieces of it that we understand really, really well. When my daughter Riley had a brain tumor on her frontal lobe during COVID, of all times, they were able to go in, remove it. It was like another day at the office for the surgery, right? Like no big deal. Like,
Not
we
for
do this.
you.
No, a lot of stress for us, but for them, it was like, we got this. Recovered. She's doing fantastic, and so like that piece of the brain we understand very well. Why are some people more susceptible to certain mental health disorders and others, never experience, more significant types? We don't really know. Again, I think there are certain things that we can control to set ourselves up for success. I think brain health is maybe a phrase of art that we need to start, utilizing more. We need to figure out how to take care of our brain. With all that being said, like, we need to appreciate that we are partly a product of our DNA, our genetics. So that's the nature piece of this. But we are also very much a product of the nurture part. Um, from the moment that we are brought into this world, we are modeling. Like, our brain is taking in all the inputs, like any great supercomputer, and we are creating, our worldly beliefs, our value system, our ideologies. And so, yeah, I think parents are a massive part of it. Even if a young person has a mental health disorder like major depressive disorder that comes sort of from nowhere and isn't triggered, how we support them as parents, not being judgmental, not sort of blaming them for feeling the way that they feel. Maybe softening on some things that feel really important for reasons we can't really explain, like grades. If I could just do away with grades, I think I'd make parents and kids so much happier. But like you got a young person who's really struggling to get out of bed every day and is wondering whether or not their life is worth living. The last thing I'm concerned about is what they're getting in English class. And so I think that you mentioned earlier, like sometimes we parent from a perspective of our own self-worth, right? And what we think our kids mean about us. One of the things that we can do as parents is to create an environment where we're modeling the right types of things, but also maybe giving them some autonomous space to take their own adventures and chart their own path.
I think that's good advice. The modeling thing, I think, always has to be there. And you talked about this a few moments ago, where when your kid says, the knee jerk reaction is you just don't understand, and how there is truth to that. I think that there is truth to that, and I think that if we're going to do a good job as parents, that we have to continue to learn. We have to stay up to date with things that are going on. We can't just say, you know what, I figured it out when I was 21 and I'm just going to keep doing the same things until I die. That's just not going to work. It requires continuous learning on our part to be able to do that. So you mentioned the brain health thing. Now, I know some of this stuff is probably stuff that's been talked about up to this point, getting outside, having face-to-face interactions and relationships with people. Are there any other good practices for brain health? So like, immediately I heard years ago that playing Sudoku is something that could potentially prevent or push back Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other things that we could do for brain health, maybe for ourselves as parents, and then maybe also try to share with our kids or encourage them to do?
Yeah, great question. All of the things that I mentioned earlier, research-based, this is not my opinion. All the things we mentioned earlier are important. So, the getting outside, human connection, which in my opinion is the most important, having deep level human connection, moving the body, nutrition, and sleep, right? So those 5 are really important. The one that probably doesn't get talked about enough, that needs to, and a place where we actually do have some control as parents, is nutrition. The things that we put in our body directly impact our brain health. I'm not coming from a medical perspective. Like, we know that, fried foods, increase our cholesterol level. Like, we talk about this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
A point of frustration for me is that we don't talk at all about how our nutrition choices directly impact our brain. So if you think about how the brain works, stress comes from inflammation. And so we want some stress in our lives, right? Like if I'm sitting here doing this podcast with you and, I don't know, a grizzly bear walks through the door, I want to feel some stress and anxiety because it'll put me in a position to go into fight or flight so I can remove myself. Or otherwise, I'm going to sit here and it's going to be the last anybody ever sees me. It'd make a really great podcast.
I'd go viral real fast. Thank you.
You would. So it'd be good for the ratings. So we want some stress. What we don't want is, we don't want stress all the time when it's not necessary. Right. And so, when we eat a lot of high ultra processed foods, so the stuff in the middle of the grocery store, foods that have a lot of ingredients in it, specifically ingredients a person wouldn't normally have in their kitchen, so dyes and chemicals and things like that. It is causing inflammation throughout our entire body, and that includes our brain. So what is the brain being told through these, ingesting these artificial foods or the ultra processed foods? It's saying, oh, you want me to be in fight, flight, freeze right now. And so with chronic inflammation comes chronic anxiety. So, I've mentioned a couple of times the book, Anxious Generation. The author does a great job. He's a researcher. He does a great job of talking about the correlation between the internet and more specifically social media, and also some overparenting, by the way, and the impact it's having on stress, anxiety, and depression. I think one other variable that he doesn't talk about that needs to be talked about is our, as Americans specifically, our love of ultra processed foods, which really kind of started to happen along the same timeline as the internet came about. So, ultra processed foods, 80s and 90s really starts to, they become even more chemically dependent in the 2000s. I don't think that's a coincidence. So as we talk about brain health, the 5 things that we already mentioned. You mentioned doing like Sudoku, any type of creative pursuit, painting, drawing, coloring. If you look at brain images, brain scans, and you look at the activity when you just take a walk or watch a sunset or color a picture, it's amazing. The brain's going crazy. Lots of things are happening. And then you look at a brain scan of somebody who's just scrolling through social media, or somehow otherwise engaging with technology. There's very little going on.
Wow.
And so just like the rest of our body, we exercise it to move it, to strengthen it. It's the same thing with our brain. Like, let's do things that challenge us to think deeper, to be creative. And then of the 5 that I mentioned, I think one place that parents can feel a sense of control is what we put in our bodies impacts our brain. And I don't think most people know that. And it's frustration for me. I want more people to talk about it. So I'm glad you gave me the opportunity to say something about it here.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. Give me 10 seconds for this last question. In this season of life, what's your best piece of advice for dads?
Take care of your own mental health too. This is, probably the best thing that came out of COVID, Anthony, if there was anything good, was we've eroded the stigma around going and getting help. I do have more and more dads reaching out to me. I try to make room for my dads as much as I can. So while I don't advertise to adults, I know how difficult it is for, adult males to seek therapy. And, sometimes they see my profile, and if they feel like there's a connection there and they reach out, I'll make room for them. I think understanding that the very best thing we can do for our kids is to model certain behaviors, and it's going to be very difficult for us to model them if we ourselves are dysregulated. So you want to take care of your children. You want to do right by young people. You want to do right by your spouse and your coworkers. Make sure that you're giving yourself privilege of focus, to think about your own mental health.
Yeah, I think that's great. Joe, I know you got to go, but I just want to say thank you for being with me and for everything that you shared. This was a fantastic conversation. I know it's going to be a blessing to fathers. Thanks again for being with me, my friend.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite, Anthony. Thanks so much.
Well, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and my prayer is that we as fathers will take the information shared by Joe today and that we'll be intentional with it, that we will assess our homes and implement the necessary changes. Maybe those changes start with us. Maybe as fathers, we spend less time on our phones, less time watching TV, more time outside. Maybe we're more intentional with the things that we consume. We can't just tell our kids what to do. We've got to live it out too. They need to see it in action, and our leadership displays that for them. So I pray that this month and year-round, we will be intentional about doing things and implementing things in our homes that are good for our mental and emotional well-being. Let's pray. Jesus, I pray that you would give us wisdom as fathers to assess our homes, to assess our children, to assess our very own practices, and determine if we're doing things that honor you, if we're doing things that benefit us in ways where we can further honor you with our actions and the words that we speak. God, I pray that you would help us to discern how our children are doing. Help us to assess where they're at mentally and emotionally. And If there needs to be intervention, God, help us to do that. We may not be the ones to do it. We may have to get involved with therapy, maybe counseling. Whatever it is, God, give us the wisdom to do what is right and what is best for our children so that we can raise them in ways that honor and glorify you. God, give us the wisdom to accomplish this. In Jesus' name, amen. Remember, what you're doing as a father is absolutely critical, vital, and important. And I know it gets bumpy on this road that we're traveling, this journey called fatherhood, but just know that at any point you need help, you can reach out to me, fatheringourfuture@gmail.com, and I will be here to help you. But I want you to remember that you've got this. Thank you so much for being with me. This is Fathering Our Future. I'm Anthony Vandegrift, and I hope you'll join me next time. Hey, one more time, I want to thank you for listening to Fathering Our Future. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, please do so wherever you listen and consider leaving a nice review because I would appreciate that. But if you're not connected to Fathering Our Future on social media, you can find it on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and there you're going to get some additional content on a more regular basis that you don't always get here on the podcast. Now, the last thing that I would like to ask of you is that you would consider becoming a financial partner of Fathering Our Future, because dads make a difference, and dads are not disposable. Dads are vital, and they are essential, and they are needed. And the impact that dads make doesn't just reside in the home, but it has a ripple effect that goes to churches and communities and culture. And I'm inviting you to be a part of equipping and empowering and educating dads to be the dad that God has called them to be and that their children need them to be. You can become a financial partner with Fathering Our Future. It can be a one-time contribution, a monthly commitment, but by doing that, you play a direct role in impacting dads. You can check the link in the description below. You can pray about it. You can get on board. And I thank you in advance for becoming a part of Fathering Our Future in a special and a dynamic way. God bless you.